Hello, I'm Dawn Medacy with Oxford Township Parks and Recreation.
And I'm Marie May from Addison Township Senior Center. And today our special guest is back again with us today.
Yes.
And it's Bruce Kopetek, and he's going to tell us all about Crowley's.
Yeah,
Remember
so
Crowley's?
welcome, Bruce. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to spread some history around.
Yes, the last time we had you here, we talked about Hudson's and the history of Hudson's, and that was a big hit for our audience. So I'm hoping that the Crowley's history that you'll share with us today will also be a hit, a big hit for all of our viewers. So, well, great. So, what have you been up to since the last time you were here? I know you've been busy working.
Yes, I think since the last time I was here, I've retired from my 45-year career as an architect, and I formed my own publishing company. So I'm self-publishing books, and I've self-published some things for other people as well. So it's a very interesting change in life. I had to completely reinvent myself. However, it's a very good thing, and obviously the Hudson's book is my magnum opus right now, but I'm working on what's looking like about a 650-page history of the passenger steamships on the Great Lakes, in particular the Detroit-based line that's called the Detroit and Cleveland Navigation Company. And I know I've come and given a pre-lecture on that one.
Yes.
I'm thinking that the book is going to be on the market in October now, because I'm just at the very end. I just need to go through the process of getting it printed and warehoused and all that kind of thing. So I think that'll be a great interest to people that don't even know the history. If everybody knew Hudson's,
Right.
and they enjoyed learning the history behind what they saw when they went shopping. Here's a piece of history that disappeared, and probably my generation never had a chance to know that much about it, unless you took an interest. My dad was in the Navy, so we were forever, that was his favorite thing to do,
Right.
go down by the river
Yep.
and watch boats.
Right. Yeah.
So, but you'd see these vestiges of that line here and there, especially at the Dawson Great Lakes Museum
Yeah.
on Belle Isle. So
Right.
I knew that I was destined to write a book about
Yes.
that, and the history I've uncovered is just going to be so entertaining and fabulous. I can't wait for it to get on the market.
Yeah.
And there is an interest because we go down, sometimes there's a park down Porter.
Yeah.
And just to watch the boats.
Boats,
Yes.
right.
Mhm.
Yep.
You know, it's so soothing
Yeah.
and,
Well,
Yeah.
and it's so big, you know.
Yeah.
yeah, the river's always been
Yes.
something that Detroit is all about. In fact, the name Detroit means the strait. So it's a misnomer. The Detroit River is not a river at all. It's a strait, which is just a waterway between two land masses, as opposed to a river that starts as a little stream in the mountains and comes down and flows to the sea. It's not that at all.
Yeah.
But also, I think it's going to be very popular because the idea of cruising on the Great Lakes on a cruise ship
Yes.
has really taken off in
Right.
the
It's
last few
been
years.
really popular.
There's 7 different lines now that are offering cruise trips
Right.
on the St. Lawrence River, Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, and the pretty long itineraries too that you can take, or a shorter trip, and see our state, our neighbor, and all that from the other side of the water,
Right.
in the middle of the water.
Right.
I had an
Yeah.
experience when I was younger, not too long ago, but we took the Boblo boat on a day cruise that went up to Lake Huron and back. And when you're in the middle of Lake St. Clair, I'm not a boater, so I don't get that experience unless somebody invites me
It's
on
need
their
to go,
boat.
right,
But
right.
you could not see land
Yeah.
on Lake St. Clair.
Right.
So
It's pretty
it's just a
crazy.
very crazy thing. If you want to experience that now, in the old days, that was a very popular thing to take these ships. Now they've been away for 50, 60, 70 years, and
Right.
now we've got these cruise ships coming.
Yeah. So
Again,
it's
like Viking and that kind of thing. So.
Well, good. Well, we'll have to have you back
Yes,
maybe later
that's
this year to talk a little bit more about
I'd
that
love
new
to.
book after. So, but today let's get to our topic. It's Crowley's. I see you brought the book.
I did. This book is, I believe, about 11 years old now, because I think I wrote it in 2014.
Wow.
Or 2013 maybe. So it's been very popular, and it also has an extremely interesting history. If you're a pure history buff, and everybody shopped at Crowley's, and Crowley's went through some different eras. There was the downtown store
Yeah.
that was right across from Hudson's, and I believe that almost anybody who went downtown shopping, they were almost kitty corner from each other. So you shop at Hudson's, and well, now let's go over to Crowley's and see what
Right,
they have. Was
right.
kind of what my mother would say.
Sure.
So it just existed at that time, and they had started building branches after the success of Northland and Eastland. But then there came a point when the downtown deteriorated, and they closed the store in 1978. So it was a little bit more of a collection of smaller stores around town.
Right.
And then toward the end, they expanded a little bit and built stores in places like Universal Mall
Right.
and other, even up in Flint and Ann Arbor and things like that. But it went out of business in the 2000s somewhere, and it's been, I think, a lot of ways forgotten.
And it was the same kind of store as Hudson's, right?
It was
Same kind of
Similar.
department
It was
store.
similar in that it was a big department store. Now, Hudson's downtown had over 2,100,000 square feet of space. Crowley's had, which would be really huge for almost any other city in the United States. Crowley's had 880,000 square feet of sales space. So if you
It is
pick
a lot of
Crowley's up and
space.
put it in another town like St. Louis or Cleveland, it would be a big, big store there. And here, it was overshadowed by Hudson's because Hudson's just dominated the market. It was world famous.
Right.
That's not to say it wasn't a very beloved store of people. And its slogan, which is the title of the book, it's Detroit's friendly store.
Right.
Because they were known as being friendly, whereas Hudson's was the creme de la creme, let's say. And some people didn't feel that it was necessarily that welcoming. It could be a little snooty at times, especially if you went up to the 7th floor to the Woodward shops.
Right.
You were expected to be of a certain class and erudition to shop there.
Sure.
So my babcha, my Polish grandmother, would not be caught there,
Right.
with her string shopping bag and
Yeah.
things like that.
Or her babushka.
The babushka, of course.
Right.
And here's a funny story about Crowley's that I think is just the most hilarious thing. One of the sources I use, and he is deceased, but there is a man that was the chief operating officer of Crowley's by the name of Steve Kennedy. And from my time that I spent with him, I've recently been in touch with his wife after he passed, and he was really just Mr. Crowley's. He operated the store. He knew all the stories, little anecdotes and things, and he had such a fascinating history. He was basically a homeless youth. He was adopted, or in foster care, I guess, all of his life, and eventually left when he was a teenager and said they used to boil potatoes in pits on Coney Island that he was living on, in the summer, lived on the beach in Coney Island.
Okay.
But he went into the military in World War II, and then that was able to pay for a college degree for him. So he got his college degree in management and business and did really well working on the East Coast, but he was offered to come get a job at Winkleman's in Detroit, which a lot of people
No,
remember.
Winkleman's, yeah.
And
Good store.
he didn't take the job, but he did also see that Crowley's needed somebody, and he agreed to take the job. So he and his wife moved from New York, I think, and came here. So I asked him what was his impressions of Detroit. He said we got out of the cab and I never saw so many babushkas in my life. That's a great little anecdote that he had. I just think that's really funny.
It is.
No, I mean that this friendly store idea, the Crowley family that ran the store said that they did not want to abandon what they called the shawl trade. And I was wondering, what is that shawl trade? And it turns out that, you had your Polish neighborhoods to the north, you had your Italian neighborhood up Gratiot was a very heavily Italian area, and some people still have roots in that area. And they didn't want to abandon them as their customers as well. So they also developed a bargain basement, but I think anybody could feel more comfortable shopping in Crowley's, even though they did have the designer apparel and things
Right.
like that.
They had a good mix.
They had a good mix, and they didn't turn anybody away. Let's just put it that way. And not that Hudson's turned people away, but I think people just had that feeling like, because it was in my family. I came from a working class background, and unless it was something really special, like my sister's bridal registry,
Right.
and in her case, my mom was such a great seamstress, there was no going to a bridal salon. My mom made the
Yeah.
dress and the veil and everything
Sure.
for my sister. So
Wow.
to order exactly what she wanted
Right.
was what she got. So, but I think that things like that, people went for their bridal gowns with their mother and all that sort of thing. If you wanted something really special, you went to Hudson's.
Hudson's.
But Crowley's was your everyday, I think I can get it
And no
cheaply.
problem.
There's something very similar cheaply
Yeah.
there. And they did carry good brands. They were known for quality. And they had the same, if you're not satisfied, bring your goods back.
I
Sure.
didn't know that.
Yeah,
I didn't
all
know
right. No, I didn't know that
No,
either.
Yeah, this whole history is
Yeah.
just buried somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was actually really hard to find
find.
one. Yeah. So
All right, well, we have to take a break. So when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about how the history was buried and how you got all uncovered it. Yes. All right, we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Peyton Manning, and I'm partnering with the American Red Cross this year to tackle blood shortages. Giving blood's important because every 2 seconds, someone actually needs blood, and unfortunately, only like 3% of the U.S. population donates. So we have to step up to give and to make sure there's plenty of blood available for those in need. Visit redcrossblood.org to get in the game and make an appointment to give.
What is dementia? Is it the same as Alzheimer's? What is vascular dementia, Lewy body, FTD, TBI, and CTE? If someone has memory loss, does that mean they have dementia? Millions of Americans ask these questions every day. I did too, and I learned. My wife Ginny developed dementia. I didn't know what to do or what was coming next. I'm Kevin Jameson, volunteer and president of the Dementia Society of America. I'm excited to offer you a free guide to understanding dementia. It's filled with facts about dementia, care planning, how doctors can help, and ways to keep your brain as healthy as possible. The Dementia Society of America is a national nonprofit, and we're ready to answer your questions. You want to live life to the fullest. I know that. Ginny did too, and I'm confident that we can help. Get your copy of the guide. Go to 1-800-DEMENTIA.org or call 1-800-DEMENTIA. Thank you.
Welcome back to Senior Break. So before break, Bruce, we were talking about uncovering the history of Crowley. So tell us a little bit how you uncovered the history.
Okay, well, it really, I went back into, of course, the Burton Historical Collection at the Detroit Public Library, and a big part of it was newspaper archives because they reported on the retail goings on in Detroit at the time. But you have to even go back before Crowley's because Crowley's didn't become a department store until 1907. It was something else previously, but you have to understand the history of that and all the little anecdotes. And at the same time, the Crowley family were doing something else. And so you have to put it all together. And I think I've done a very good job on it. The interesting thing is that it was a family-owned company almost to the very end.
Okay.
It was when it was sold to other people was when the downfall really, really happened. But it's hard to understand. Even the Hudson store, the Hudson family owned it for many years. And so you have to go back to those people too and understand who they were as a family and all that to understand the store completely. So back in the 1800s, there was no Crowley's really. There was several big stores. Even prior, the Hudson's came in 1891 was their first opening. But even before that, there were several large department stores downtown that didn't exist 20 years later because they went through bankruptcies and things like that. There was Mabley and Company, which was a large store that had branches in Pontiac and other places. And they were in the process around the time in the 1870s, 1880s, looking to build this big building on the corner where I think it's called One Woodward now, but it used to be Standard Federal Savings.
Okay.
And that was our family bank, so when I go downtown, we could go there and do our banking. And when I worked downtown, there was a Colonnade cafeteria in the basement. That was a real staple to go eat lunch, to get something from the Colonnade cafeteria, and it was very good. So that Mabley's was going to build this building called the Majestic Building. It was called the Mabley Building to begin with, and even the entrances had bronze M's to use as handles. And it was a very luxurious building. It was going to have offices, but the first 5 floors or so would be the big Mabley's department store.
Okay.
And then, at the time, there was also, a couple of things like Newcomb Endicott and Company. And so the department store scene in the late 1800s was not the same as it would have been in the 1960s. So this Mabley and Company was really the biggest store of all. But Christopher Mabley, who owned it, was, I sometimes like to say, well, he was just a drunk. Let's just say that he was plagued with alcoholism. And so he needed somebody to run his store and do things because actually his office had a door right into the Russell House Hotel next door.
Okay.
And he would go spend the time in the bar
Okay.
rather than running the business. So he needed the J.L. Hudsons and that to run it. And at the time, there were some Irish immigrants that came. and one was from Chicago, and then one came here looking for work, and his name was Blackwell.
Yep.
And the funny thing is that his wife also came from Ireland, and obviously at that time where there was what they called the Troubles in Ireland, when Ireland was seeking its independence from the United Kingdom, and Anne Blackwell, eventually, she was the niece of a priest in Ireland that was really on the side of independence there. And I don't know that we would maybe call him a terrorist today. I don't believe he did any, being a priest, I don't believe that he did any, there's no record of
Right.
horrible things he did.
Right.
But just to speak out against the ruling government at that point was cause for arrest and maybe execution. So he told her, or Mary Blackwell, he told her to get out, go to the United States. And so she met up with this, Blackwell. There was also a businessman from Chicago by the name of Partridge.
Yeah.
So the original name of the store that became Crowley's was Partridge and Blackwell.
Blackwell,
It's
yeah.
a misnomer to say Partridge. A lot of people say it was Partridge. It's not. I mean, and so the store in 1907, they had kind of built themselves up here, there, and they were. When Mabley's failed, they moved into that store that Mabley was going to open, because Mabley's, after he died, a couple of people tried to run it, and I guess it just didn't work out, because you had Hudson's on the rise and this Partridge and Blackwell on the rise. So they moved into that space, but they needed more space. It wasn't even big enough for their dreams and all that. So when they moved into the building, it was no longer known as the Mabley building, but it was known as the Majestic building.
Okay.
And that was the tallest building in Detroit. It's a crime that was torn down, really. When it opened, it had observation deck on the top, because you could see all the way to Dearborn.
Yeah.
Things
It's pretty
like
cool.
that. Yeah, very cool. It's a beautiful building made out of sandstone and very dark red granite. And the inside was, also very, elevator lobby is lined in marble and that sort of thing. So anyway, they, this was the situation. Well, Partridge and Blackwell were going to build this beautiful terracotta store on the corner of Gratiot and Monroe. And they did so, and it was open in 1907. However, 1907 was a big crash in the United States based on copper futures, that people were trying to control the copper market, and banks failed, and it was a huge panic. So Partridge and Blackwell were done. Well, the banks that had all the mortgages on this beautiful white terracotta building
Right.
called in the Crowley brothers. Crowley brothers were, the parents were immigrants from Ireland, came over like during the potato famine, settled themselves near the Michigan Central Station in an Irish neighborhood there, and that neighborhood centered around what's called the Most Holy Trinity Church.
Yes.
And they were part of that, and the Crowley brothers, the parents ran a grocery store. They lived upstairs and they had a grocery store on the first floor.
yeah.
It was very typical of the area, right?
Right.
So what the sons, they had the three sons, Daniel, William, and Joseph Crowley, they had been working in jobs for wholesalers, or what they would call jobbers at the time. So they provided merchandise to other stores.
Entities, yeah.
The biggest department store in Toledo was called Milner's. William Milner was the owner of that store. So the banks said, approach the Crowley brothers, whom they dealt with, and they had their warehouses were right on Jefferson Avenue, near where the Cobo Hall would be today.
Okay.
And the bank approached them because they were good customers of the bank. They paid their bills. They were, up above, and very honest. So they wound up asking the Crowley brothers, we've got this bankrupt store on our hands. Rather than liquidate the whole thing, would you guys be interested in running it?
Yeah.
And they said, not really, because we know the wholesale side. We don't know the retail side. So, but they did know William Milner.
Okay.
And so they
Worked.
invited him together, and it became Crowley, Milner and Company.
Okay.
And we can go on a little bit more about that, because that's got some interesting
All right.
parts of it too.
Okay.
Time for a break.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that when we come back.
Be right back.
One in every 500 African Americans in the U.S. suffers from sickle cell disease. One and 3 African American blood donors as a match for patients with sickle cell. 1 appointment to donate blood with the American Red Cross can help save a life. Will you be that one? Visit redcrossblood.org/ourblood today to schedule an appointment at a location near you.
Welcome back to senior break. All right, so we were left off
in
with,
1907.
right.
You have the formation of Crowley. So Crowley and Milner operated the store. Milner commuted every other day or so from Toledo to Detroit to have a handle on both of his properties, and he had a very powerful Pierce Arrow car. And what was said was that he every time he drove, he tried to break his record the next time. If you can imagine, but he didn't go on I-75. You know, there was probably Telegraph Road was the connection between Toledo
In
and Michigan.
Detroit, right.
So that was probably at that era was kind of a hard thing to do, to run 2 businesses like that. But there were the Crowley brothers. They learned fast. And so after a year, they changed the name of the store to Crowley, Milner and Company, and they said this is a whole new era for Crowley's. And they did some things. Of course, the most famous people that I think famous thing that people remember is the wooden escalators in
Yes,
Crowley's.
yes.
That you rode those things, they kind of wobbled and clanked and clanked and clanked and everything like that, but had a charm to them because they were stained dark mahogany wood or something
Right.
on that order, or maybe walnut. And so the original Partridge and Blackwell store had an escalator, but the early escalators are very steep. And a current escalator, you get on, it goes flat for a while, and then it takes you up, and then it flattens out, and you can step off comfortably. These you stepped on it and went up. And at the top, you have to step off. People were afraid of them. So they had like a nurse at the top just in case anybody fell and all this. But people generally didn't like riding those. And the Crowley brothers, when they took over, they said, we're getting rid of that thing. We don't want those escalators in the store because they're not safe. It takes up space we could use for selling.
Right.
And a number of things. They had a grocery store and a bank, which would have been trouble during the Depression and things like that. So they got rid of the bank, they got rid of the grocery department, but operated as a fully fledged department store. Wow. And that situation went on until the 1920s, when after William Crowley, who was the head of the company, passed away, and his wife, Jenny, was really left in the position because it was such a strongly held Irish family business. She really had to take over a lot, but they had a son, Daniel, that also took an interest in the store and was able to run it for many years. But in 1928, they did a renovation. They changed the mezzanine layout so it could have a restaurant and books shop on the mezzanine, a beauty parlor on the mezzanine level, and then new escalators.
Yeah.
And those new escalators in 1928 were the ones that we remember, not the old ones.
Okay.
So it went through a little bit of a transformation then.
That's cool.
It became a very successful store at that time. It was able to compete with Hudson's because, as they said, it was the friendly store,
Right.
and it was never abandoned the lower end customer either. They had a much wider price range than Hudson's did, and they probably didn't have the top that Hudson's did, but you could still get high end merchandise in their
Good
various
quality
shops on the
merchandise,
third
yeah.
floor. And so that's how it really ended up through the war and things like that. And the family did some great things. They during the Depression, when they struggled, but when the city of Detroit couldn't even afford to put up a Christmas tree in Campus Martius for Christmas or Grand Circus Park, the Crowleys furnished that for the city of Detroit. They paid for it because they said, "What's Christmas
Without a tree?"
Without a tree." So they were conscious of their customers as well. And in the research, if we can go back to that for a second, I found a very interesting story that the one brother, William, if we're talking about the Most Holy Trinity Church, that William was an altar boy there. And there was an outing for the altar boys that some of the parish administrators, the priests, most parishes had several at the time,
Right.
nuns, everything, were going to go on an outing on a small boat. And they were going to go down to Monroe. The harbor there is kind of pretty, so they're going to go down there and come back. However, at night when they were coming back, their little ship was rammed by a ferry boat called the Garland. And you can look online at Google or something like that and find pictures of the Garland. And it cut this boat in half. And I think that only 4 on that boat survived.
Wow.
One of them being William Milner. So if it's interesting that these families have their own tragedy, just like we have
Right.
crises and
Right.
stresses and
Yes.
tragedies. You can imagine how, but he was luckily fished out of the water. Maybe he was a good swimmer. But all the Crowleys were good baseball players. They liked to play on softball leagues and things like that. So
Right.
they were kind of athletic.
That's kinda
Maybe
cool.
that helped them. Yeah.
And these stores were across the street from each other, weren't they?
They were essentially kitty
Hudson's and
corner.
Crowley?
Yeah.
Kitty corner, okay.
Hudson's was also on the corner of Farmer and Gratiot at its most southeast corner, and then just kitty corner from that because Crowley's was on Gratiot and Monroe.
And that was a big help to bring people in too.
Yeah, kitty corner. And
Yeah.
really,
were both
at one time, downtown was a popular store. Was Kearns was a department store, and that was founded by German immigrants.
Okay.
And so was the Otto Kern, the Ernst Kern company. Otto was the son, but Ernst was and his wife were the one. It started off as a notion shop for sewing notions.
Oh.
And they built it into a department store that lasted until 1960.
So how did you decide to write books on stores? Like
You know-
Hudson's, because it's so
Probably
interesting
it
and
is.
it needed to be done, really.
Yeah, I saw a few years ago that with all these stores closing, there was interest in what they were like and what they were. And I used to travel as a kid. My parents took us in the summers all over the place. If it wasn't a year that my dad had a lot of money, we'd just go up north, or we'd go somewhere in Canada. Canada was really a favorite destination. We went all the way to the Gaspé Peninsula, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and things like that.
So nice.
And it wasn't until later, before I was born, my dad took my brother and sister to out west, where they actually met Walt Disney, because Disneyland was new, and my dad wanted to take them there.
Sure.
So I didn't get to go out west on a car trip like that until after my sister got married and my parents had some time on their hands. But then my mom always liked to shop. So no matter where we went to the 1964 World's Fair in New York, but my dad took my mom to Macy's. And I can remember they had wooden escalators, they still do in New York City. And there was a lunch counter
Yeah.
in the basement that was called the Dutch Treat. And, harking back to the Dutch settlers that founded New York. And so, because it was New Amsterdam at the time. But I remember sitting with my parents and my mother telling me that I could order a hamburger, but if I had to eat the whole thing. If I didn't eat the whole thing, I was in big trouble. But then that night they took us to Coney Island and
Yeah.
things like that.
It's so cool.
I have this interest in that. Wherever we go, my mom would want to shop.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
So, and then when I was old enough that I was able to realize what Hudson's was and Crowley's was,
And what it meant to so many people.
exactly. It was really a cultural institution. In a way, it wasn't a museum, but in some ways you could almost see these stores as museums because they did carry the best of the day. And they were like a living museum, or certainly their buildings were imposing.
And they
Crowley's
had activities at some, like Hudson's had that Santa floor.
events of
Yeah.
all sorts.
Some-
you know.
Crowley's had
Yeah.
they were known for their Santa breakfasts. and-
Yes, yep.
Yeah.
I took a niece to one of those, and they were known. There was some rivalry over Christmas decorations between Crowley's and Hudson's. Crowley's didn't have as many full-blown events. I think they were probably happy enough to let Hudson's draw the traffic downtown, and they would benefit from that by having
Yes,
people
yeah.
Right.
around. And the store just probably didn't have the marketing funds that Hudson's
Right.
would have.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
But it was actually fun to go between those stores.
A lot of memories.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness,
Lot of
everybody,
memories.
for so many people.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, it's a lot of information, a lot of great information. If you're interested in hearing more about Crowley's, Bruce is going to be at the Oxford Senior Center on August the 1st at 1:00, and he's going to talk about Detroit's friendly store, Crowley's. So, thank you, Bruce, for
Thank you, Bruce.
coming out today and joining us. A lot of great information. Look forward to hearing more about your upcoming book. We'll have you back and appreciate it. So,
I appreciate
Yeah.
that you take the time to invite me, and it's such a pleasure to come talk with you and all of your residents that enjoy the show.
yeah. All right. So we'll see you next time.
Bye now.
See you again.